cancers and nonprofits. Cancer number one is nonprofits are inherently slow to change. And one of the things coming out of this crisis is forcing us to pivot. And number two, they always planned in very short increments and weren't looking into the future. And now that's what we have to do. But we'll come back to that. After I got out of public accounting and I moved to this platform, started an organization called Fiscal Strategies for Nonprofits. And we do that consulting work with nonprofits all around the world. My partner in this is out of London. So we work with NGOs and such. And I spend about a third of my time working with clients now. I spend about a third of my time doing what I'm doing here today, teaching classes and things. My home base is out of Georgetown University, and really enjoy that. You know, I teach in the public policy school. I do also the McDonough Business School, but my favorite one is to teach out of the School of Journalism. I do effective financial communications there. So it just sort of shows you where we're going with this. And then recently, I was on campus at Georgetown University on March. We were doing in the business school, a leadership conference. So nonprofit leader CEOs from around the country were in for 4 days. That went from March 8th to 12th. And you can imagine what happened. We were in a class I was teaching when everybody started like looking at their phones. I said, oh, you're not paying attention to me. And what it was, a blast email that went out from the university that campus was shutting down while we're in class. You know, it's just amazing how that week went from March 8th to March 12th. It was like a different world in literally a few hours. And we're going to come back and talk about that. My contact information down here, Fiscal Strategies, you'll see two logos. SC4N is just a website to help post articles and things. Everything that website posted only at the end of March. So everything up there is only about a month old, and really would go there. And the thing, there's a template worksheet there that we're going to talk about. You can grab there, but we'll go there later, and we're going to finish with that. So just look at the SC4 nonprofits. We're posting articles. My main collaborator is an attorney out of DC. He's really good on the legal side of what we're talking about here. We're posting articles, weekly thoughts or blogs, and Q&As. And there's a number I'm going to refer to as we go through. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And Isis and I talked about making this interactive. Don't hesitate to post questions as we go through. We will have some polling questions, and I'd like to, respond to your questions as time permits. And we'll be available at the end to hang on for a little bit if anybody wants to talk. So we're in this change period that's just, I think it's unprecedented. I like to refer back to, a couple of the other crises we've all been through in the last dozen years or so, but each one is different. And, but this one really feels different. It feels overwhelming to people. And I believe this point I want to make, we're going to go through some of the learning objectives here and such, is that we're going to fall back on a heavy financial impact decision point based on all the thousands of decision-making metrics that we have to go through right now. And it will help give a sense of direction and calmness. And I'm going to talk through about messaging and all that. So the key word here is framework and communications. And I'm going to give you tools for both of these to be able to use 1 hour from now. And I use this. I want to let you know that this article I wrote I wrote it around March 20th, what came out of about a week's worth of back and forth with people in the class and clients and things. And I actually went old school on this template. I print it out and I keep it by my side here. You'll see it in a minute. And it's really becomes my cheat sheet, and you'll see it in a little bit. It does say financial professionals, but we all are. But it's really for senior management and the boards, and to have a clear walking path going forward during a time where it's too easy to be hesitant. So the learning objectives break down this way. We're going to look at the impact of this changing environment, which is crazy. I was so exhausted yesterday. You know, you come in on a Monday here and the days of the week don't matter anymore. I think we're stuck in like perpetual Wednesdays right now. It's just the way it feels to me. But I can't even predict where we're going to be, you know, 2 days from now, let alone months. And so we have to understand that. This one is number one for me. I'm going to spend a decent amount of time on this, assessing the financial health of the organization. That, you know, and we'll come back to that. I mean, simply put, there's organizations fall in one of two buckets, either have assets or don't. These are the two volatility things that we're trying to interpret right now. Everybody's funding sources are being impacted. And at the same time, there's demand pressure. It's going up and down. Events are canceled. Demand for services are going, you know, they're going in both directions for most organizations. We're going to talk about when we come back and look at financial health and how we do that. We're going to take a hard look at operating reserves and hope to be able to answer your questions around those and how I do that. And then we want to save the last 10 minutes or so, Isis, to make sure we watch the time. I got my timer up here to go actually walk through the template, because I think you're going to want to use this, but it's also built in a way that you can edit it a little bit. And it's a form of a dashboard. And anybody's ever been in any of my classes, I am a big dashboarder, fitting on one page, getting things out there. I don't graph things. They take up too much space, but it's really your game plan, your cheat sheet. And we'll do that for the last 10 minutes. Okay. Now, to give this presentation a little bit of, make it a little easier to absorb, it's really broken into 4 pieces. The 5th piece is going through the framework. The starting point, I want to have a brief discussion here. It's really important. I really big into the psychology of the financial side, and I want people to understand how we got to the starting point. I think it's comforting to me, but it's also going to be comforting to you, and more importantly, to the people you're messaging to, your board and such. And I'm going to come back to that, because we're not asking for board approval during this time, because we're going to move quickly. But we got to keep them there, C&T, confidence and trust. We're going to go through the 3 critical factors, which is assessing financial health, looking at your funding sources, and looking at demand. We're going to talk about timing and implementation. There's a really key piece that shows up on the framework, the dashboard. And then I do want to, Isis, and this is where I'll need your help here. I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with this concept of operating reserves and formal versus informal policies. Really important. That can be a whole webinar by itself and such. So let's get started, finding the starting point. The key word in here is overwhelming. And we have to recognize that. Every discussion I have had, including up until I finally passed out last night with people, it's just, you know, on the phone, you know, West Coasters calling last night, and then everybody from Europe calling early, is that you go 2 degrees of separation and you can't predict where we're going. You know, even organizations that feel they're well positioned right now, their constituents are, their supply chain isn't, their staff is being affected by remote working. You know, there's so many things that are tripping in. Some organizations are doing well because they're getting money from the government, you know, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, you know, the CARES Act, the second version of that. So it's just, we have to recognize this. So here's what I'm going to make a statement here, that during this uncertain time, protecting for the financial position has to be the #1 priority. And Isis, if anybody responds to this, let me know. I believe, you know, short of running somebody over with a car, the #1 place that nonprofit organizations are getting affected immediately is in their financial position. And they're most at risk that either whether they have assets or don't, to, you know, going over the edge. You know, organizations that are, you know, really don't have a lot of assets, that are struggling to go from pay period to pay period, accounts payable are going up, you know, all the time. You know, if someone's late in making a donation or contribution or membership, it really hurts them. They've got to move really quickly. They could slip over the edge really fast. Organizations that are really, you know, have healthy organizations, built up a lot of reserves, I'm really worried about those groups, because I don't want them to come out of this, you know, a shell of what they were, that they got so financially impacted that they can't do what they used to do before. So where that takes us is here. Go to the bottom of the page first. Look at the underlines. that we have to adopt, and I think it's a conservative and people are always comfortable with that approach, that we overweight the impact of our decisions from a financial perspective. Okay, we have to make a lot of decisions, and we're going to pick A over B because A might protect our financial position better than B. And I believe it actually gives a sense of calmness to people right now because they're not sure where to go. And so if we say that all these quick decisions, these decisions we're making really rapidly that are related to this, we don't know, we still don't know the pace of change yet. Some states are just starting to open up, but it's almost superficial opening up, depending on where you are. You saw what Georgia's doing, different states, state of Washington and such. We're still struggling with the scope of the change and the impact. And I want to make a statement. Everybody look up at the ceiling for a minute and just visualize this. Coming out of 9/11 in the banking crisis of 2008 and 9, the one thing we all universally got wrong is we did not anticipate the scope, the pace, or the change that was in front of us, and especially how long it was going, that most organizations burned through more of their assets than they should have from a hindsight perspective, because it took a long time to come out. And it really impacted me because it happened in 9/11 and then we let it happen again in the banking crisis, and we got to protect ourselves here. And we'll talk about, operating reserves. Just be aware, what organizations spent 20 or 30 years building up reserves, they can lose it in 20 or 30 weeks. And it can even go faster here. So you see where I'm going here? This is the last slide here. So can you put up the first polling questions just really to see what you think about this?
Absolutely. So
yeah, there we go.
What you should be seeing is
go ahead.
I was going to say, so what you should be seeing is a yes or no poll question in front of you. We're going to take about 30 seconds for folks to answer.
Not to over influence you, but I am. I am totally biased on this, and I let the boards and everybody know and stuff. I just feel that that's where we're most at risk in nonprofits. And if there's any comments related to it, you can shoot them out. But it looks like everybody's agreeing so far. And I think it's really important to do that. I think, you're trying to bring a sense of calmness when it really doesn't exist, but I've seen it in board members' eyes and staff and myself, and I said, at least I got to protect this. Okay. So I'm going to shut that down. Okay. And I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, good. So now we're going to part 2, and we're going to slow down here a little bit. This is where I'm actually going to give you some things to think about and to help you shape your thought process. There's a 3-step process in this part 2. We're going to look at a financial health assessment, step 1. We're going to then look at the vulnerability of funding sources and then demand volatility pressure. We're going to break those down a little bit. I believe, and this is not an accident to these steps, that we needed to take a quick look to see if your organization or the organization you're helping is either in a strong or a weak position. I just believe that it's A or B for most groups. If you're in a sort of a neutral position, you're on the strong side. You know what I mean? And you see it. I've seen groups that have worked really hard over many years. They've just had their 80th anniversary and 100th anniversary. They've built up some operating reserves. You could tell when you open up their balance sheet, you could tell. So I'm going to make a statement that you're not going to like, but you got to come to, and if you've ever been in my classes, I do this all the time. Ready? The health of an organization only shows up on the balance sheet. Yet we get tunnel vision on budgets and income statements because that's just human nature, and we watch over budgets. But the health of an organization only shows up on the balance sheet. You can be having a great budget year and on your balance sheet still having cash flow problems, that you have a lot of accounts payable, you have debt, you have different things going on, okay? Yet your organizations universally get tunnel vision on their budget income statements, and they are not managing their balance sheet. And the one thing that everybody can do, from an intern all the way up to a board member and staff and senior management, is help leave an organization in a stronger position financially that when they leave than when they got there. And that shows up through operating reserves. And you'll see that on the bottom here. When we get to the template, the framework, you're going to see that I'm going to help you do a quick short list of balance sheet strengths and weaknesses. We'll go through it at the time when we pull up the template. I do want to let you know that my single benchmark is a little unfair, but universally, operating reserves is the benchmark for a healthy nonprofit organization. That's your reserves, that's your savings that you've built up for a rainy day. Hopefully people at home have their version of an operating reserve, which would be a safety fund, you know what I mean? And such. But this is working capital for a for-profit and all that. And we're going to go through that. I want to start the process here a little bit about this formal versus informal. And what I mean by that, I think larger nonprofit organizations have a formal operating reserve policy. Mid to smaller size might not. I know, since we can't really take a poll and know how many, I'm going to assume 2/3 don't have a formal policy that are on the call here today, but just the way it is. If you don't even have a formal policy, you want to sort of have an informal one or a temporary operating reserve. So real quick, we're going to go through operating reserves a little more detail later on, but I do want to answer the question what they are. Operating reserves, if you look at your balance sheet, you have assets minus liabilities equal net assets, correct? Everybody there? Okay. And in that net assets section, which is really important for nonprofits, especially C3 entities, is you have funds with restrictions and funds without restrictions, with donor restrictions, without. I still like to refer to them as unrestricted and restricted. And so the operating reserves come out of that net asset. It's the unrestricted portion of those. And it's not even all of those. It's the portion that's liquid of those. So I've seen a lot of organizations with millions of dollars of unrestricted net assets on their financial statement, but if they have a building or they have vans for a community, food program or something, and a lot of those unrestricted net assets are tied up in hard assets like a building, they're not liquid. Okay, and so such groups that have a lot of operating reserves, you'll see it sitting in there. They'll have investment policies, they'll have investment accounts, certificates of deposit, these are cash available. Organizations that are constantly, the biggest thing they worry about when they wake up in the morning and go and call the end of the day is accounts payable. They have no operating reserves because they're just, they're using other people's credit, if their accounts payable are high. So a formal operating reserve policy talks about this. I would like everybody to make one note here. There is a project called the National Operating Reserve Initiative. It was done in combination with the Urban Institute and United Way International. It was done close to 10 years ago now. We had over 100 of us working on it. I was part of the committee. It was mostly dominated, unfortunately, by large universities, but we only came up with one universal statement. You got to remember this. And the universal statement was we could not come up with the perfect operating reserve goal, but what we did come up with was a statement, and it's right in the front of the study, and I can send you to a link to it, that organizations that have built up less than 3 months, write that down, less than 3 months operating reserves are deemed to be in a weakened position. Okay. And that's the end of the statement. Organizations with less than 3 months operating in a weakened position. So you could then refer that 3 months and north of that would be starting to be in a stronger position. I think the universal bucket is somewhere you want to be north of 3 months. 501c3 publicly supported groups, we tend to, perfect world, trying to get towards 6 months, half a year budget. C6, member-based organizations, those type of things, C4s, advocacy, C7s, clubs, and all those were like 6 to 12 months. Okay, usually don't see above 12. Now, I do have groups I've worked with, they do exist, some of them a lot, where they have 2, 3, 4 years of operating reserves. They've sold a building, they've just been around, they've been able to do that. And those aren't endowment funds and things. But back to that 3-monther, So I don't want groups that don't have assets to discourage right now, but having that 3 month out there and let boards know, because you'll see health strong or weak. If we have less than 3 months, I universally want to think you're in a weakened position. We might not use that term. And if you got 6 months or more, that you're in the strong position. You see where I'm going? And I just think it's a good benchmark, and we'll see that visually here in a few minutes. Okay, step 2. This is my favorite section. It's called the retention sensitivity around funding sources. And here's something I started doing like 2 days after this whole crap started. Is you can't go into a boardroom, because there was someone from Easter Seals, a Midwest group in my class. And over the 3 days, she went from being like, we're doing great. So by the time she left DC, she thought 90% of her funding was in jeopardy because of the way they're funded as an Easter Seals group. Okay. A lot of people are going, oh, we think our funding is going to be down 20% and all that. It says to the board that you're guessing. But if you could trifurcate the process to look at your different sources of funding into 3 buckets, you can rename these, but this is the way I like to talk about them. The rock solid, the vulnerable, and then the shaky. And you see my percentages here. That's up to you to fix, but I sort of fall into this category. 80 to 100% means I'm feeling really good about those sources. If you're a membership-based organization, and it's really interesting, you're a membership-based organization with a June 30 year end. What do? You're supposed to be dropping membership dues in April, right? Did it affect your renewal cycle? And if it's really curious to look at this compared to 9/11, that happened in September, right? So those membership organizations and donor-based organizations in September, if they had a June 30 year end, most of their memberships were already in the door by September, right? They go out you know what I'm saying? So it's the timing. Those same membership organizations now are it's 6 months later, they're in the exact opposite bucket and they're really at risk. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. And from a donor perspective, if you get most of your donations in the last quarter, you're a traditional quarter raiser, at the last quarter of the calendar year, those groups in 9/11 were really in tough position. But those same groups now, at least we collected all that money in November, December, and January. You know what I mean? So we got to look at this. Also, when we go through here, and I'll spend time on the worksheet here, you could have a funding source in all 3 buckets. So for example, let's say your organization is highly reliant on grants. Your federal grants, some of which have already been awarded and all that, might be in the rock solid. But you might have a grant from a private foundation who's really getting hit by this COVID-19 crisis, and they might be cutting off their grants for the rest of the year, a grant that you're supposed to get in June. So a grant could be in here and another grant could be down here. And I think donations and things like that, looking out a little bit, a lot of those fall in here, and we don't even know how to predict those. But I think it gives the board and yourself and staff a sense of confidence that we've taken our funding and we've split it out into these, and we start to do some modeling off of this, and you'll see this on the spreadsheet. I really like this section. Okay, can we do polling question number 3?
Absolutely.
Slide 17. We skipped over 1. Okay.
Polling question number 3.
Yeah.
All right, so you should be seeing an agree or disagree question in front of you. Again, we'll take about 30 seconds for folks to answer.
Yep. While you're answering that, I have had a few groups where we've gone to 4 buckets. I don't like the 2 bucket. I think the 3 bucket is just a different picture. And so this has been an extremely useful thing. Also, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You'll see it. I use this. I keep my cheat sheet next to my computer here. I use this a lot. And so anybody has a different method or a comment related to it? Isis, do you see any?
Nothing yet. I did see a few comments earlier on about, how important it is to view all of this through the lens of your mission and values and, finding balance there as well.
Good. So can you do me a favor and restate that question in about 5 minutes? Because I would like to address it then. It really fits well. And I'm going to be doing a blog on that later this week. Okay, good. So we have agreement. We're going to move on. Okay, the third bucket step is looking at demand. And we all understand this. It's just a way, you'll see it on the spreadsheet here in a little bit, how it works on the framework. That we're going to take our, and it's not magical top 5. Some groups we do 3, some groups we do, I don't like to do more than 7. In the order of magnitude, not from a funding perspective, just from a demand perspective. So if you were doing in-person workshops, of course, those have been actually canceled and we're not doing those. You're pivoting to maybe virtual things. You have a couple things you're doing. You're going to be renewing membership. You have an appeal going out. You have a grant that's supposed to start in 2 months. All these things are going to, we're going to look at how they affect demand. Back to that Easter Seals group, what was heart-rendering was not only because most of their funds were coming from the general public, and there's just the general public wasn't sure how to react, and they had some grants that were coming from private foundations. Meanwhile, their demand for community services was skyrocketing, and they weren't sure what to do. She sent me her 990 to look at so I could just get a quick look at what they looked like in the past. And you know what I noticed on their 990? On the top page, where it said year of formation, when they started in 1919. They had just celebrated their 100th anniversary, had done a capital campaign around that and all that. Meanwhile, in a matter of a few days, they had built up some operating reserves. It's good. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. And there's an article I want to share you to, how the picture had changed. Okay, and we're gonna come back, and it was just amazing. Their demand was going through the roof, and a lot of their traditional funding sources were going to be impacted, and impacted a lot. This bottom piece, you'll see this on the framework. I don't use this all the time, maybe half the time. I think it's been useful in communicating with board members about controllable versus uncontrollable. And what that does, and what that does for me is I want the board and staff to focus on this when it comes to making a decision, but we have to react to these. The uncontrollable was, the governor, went for your state is in a shelter in place. So you couldn't do certain things. You didn't make that decision. That decision was made for you. Controllable is how we're pivoting. And we want people to talk and plan around this and be aware of this. So it just breaks down some of this that we're dealing with into A, B. You notice how I did weak, strong on balance sheet. We're taking action. Some of them are controllable. Some of them we have no control over, And so you'll see this on the spreadsheet. I think it's given a sense of calmness that we have a well thought out process. Okay, let's go to the third section. And this is something of course, I'm using all these things I keep saying I really like, but here, this concept of super short versus short term. Again, I think it helps in a purpose and action during a time of overwhelming, because I say to the board, look, if you sit about like domino A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, you freak out. So what we want them to do is think about the super short term things we have to. Okay, and here's how they break down. And this is not perfect, but I'll tell you why I started here. Most mid-size and small organizations, I feel the super short covers about a 30-day period of time. And short-term to me, because short-term to me is always 90 days, is the remainder of that period. And when we're done on the spreadsheet, it gets the board and yourself to say, hey, this is what we're doing right now. Let's concentrate on that, but keep this in our peripheral vision. Again, it's just a way to sort of break down like this overwhelmingness into pieces. I really like the super short term. It's like we're handling this, and we're going to talk about this next, and we're going to keep in our vision. I do have organizations, and it tends to be as you get bigger, this gets tighter. So really large mega size groups, they're dealing in 7 to 10 days here, up to 10 days, up to 7 days. And then everything else falls here. Okay. So, it's just the nature of what they are and such. made a presentation where we had the Fortune 100 of nonprofits last week. And the CFOs were there, the really large groups, and they liked this. They liked the whole framework, but and with those mega groups, it's like running General Motors or something. You would recognize the names of those groups. So this is a good tactic. You'll see it on the spreadsheet. Okay. So the short term, I think it helps people gain a sense, because it's like anything. If I think about 10,000 things I have to do, I get overwhelmed. If I break that down into the top 3 and I just get 1 or 2 done, it brings a sense of order and calmness to us that is really important at this time. Okay, I want to talk about operating reserves. Isis, if you could make sure if there's any comments related to operating reserves, I want people to feel comfortable about this. It's hard to uniformly take everybody's balance sheet and make one benchmark, but I believe this is as close to getting a universal benchmark as we can get, is assessing your operating reserves. So on a financial dashboard, your main dashboard, I always like to have a button on there on operating reserves, a reserve goal of 6 months. And I love to do things on dashboards that are non-dollars, but picture this real quick. If you saw a dashboard and it had the balance sheet, the income statement, and this key indicators, and it said operating reserve goal 6 months, and we're sitting at 18 months, you have to say, hey, that's a strong organization, right? Their goal is 6 months, and they built up a year above that. Say another organization you look at, their goal is 6 months, and they're sitting at -2 months. What does that mean? They're underwater. That means their accounts payable, the ability to pay bills are, if they were to close that door of the day, they would not have enough funds to pay off their bills, or they would have to use restricted funds to pay off. Okay? Remember, it only comes to unrestricted. So this concept here of watching operating reserves, and it's a real quick visual, you'll see it on the dashboard. And, on one hand, you could see really strong. On the other hand, you might see underwater situations, and it just jumps off the page. So 2 things. I think most organizations fall into one of these groups, or either on the strong side or the weak side. I hate that word weak. I will use, combinations like not where we want to be, we're below our goal, above our goal. It's up to you. But for this, to be blunt, I'm just using strong versus weak. Organizations that are in a strong position have operating reserves, and they've got a problem. We're going to talk about it in a minute. They got to figure out how to use those. Organizations that are in a weakened position without operating reserves, they got to move right here to cost containment. Otherwise, they're just going to get weaker. If their accounts payable before COVID-19 hit was sitting at 90 days, they're probably like sitting at 120 days now. They're having even, organizations that have operating reserves, they got to figure out, and this thing called metering out is here. On that SE4N website down here, there's an article and a tactic that takes you through. It's actually, I'm not trying to sell this, but it's actually a full 60-minute webinar. We go through how to use the operating reserves and such. So to state the obvious, if you're in a good position, you have operating reserves, it's great because you have options. The bad thing is you're probably going to make some mistakes. And because we don't know where this crisis is going, even now, a full 6 weeks into it, or more, 7 weeks into this, I think we got to be careful using operating reserves. And here's the big ugly. Ready? No operating reserve protects you against a long-term or permanent change. This is in the article on the SC4 website if you go down there. Operating reserves are built for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, for a short-term temporary change. There was we had an event canceled due to weather and we're going to reschedule. There was a natural disaster. We're going to help out for a couple of weeks. We had a sponsor that merged with another organization. We lost the sponsorship, and how we're going to get around that. Also, people forget the real reason we build operating reserves is not for disasters like this. We build operating reserves because strong organizations, they want to merge with another entity. They want to do research and development. They want to start a new program. They have the working capital to do that. A lot of weak, small organizations want to start new things. They have no capital. They can't grow. Okay? So my definition and statement here is this: by any imagination, or I'm not stating this right, by any thought process we have here, the current crisis is not short term. I pray that we figure out the medical side of this soon, and we will. The economic side of this is going to be with us for a long time. And so with that statement, we really shouldn't be using operating reserves, because there's no way we're in that 6 months or less or 3 months or less here with this crisis. And you got to think about that. Now, it's impossible to not use some operating reserves, okay? And we'll talk about that. Weak organizations, they don't have this dilemma, how much little to use, okay? They got to move to cost containment real quick, okay? So back here real quick, go to this article. By definition, if your donations are down, memberships are down, contributions are down, events got canceled, and you weren't able to, because nonprofits can only pull back on expenses so quickly. You've probably been deficit spending, so you're using operating reserves by definition right now. What we need to do in this first 90-day or 6-week period of time, figure out what your time periods are, that limit how much we're going to take out of operating reserves. And I argue in the article to take out no more than between 10 and 15% in the first 90 days. Because we need to make sure that when we come out of this, that financially strong organizations aren't wrecked. Okay, and we need this position. I argue that you want to have at least 50 to 60%. I call it rounds 1, 2, and 3. If you use 10% in round 1, the first 90 days, and we're still ways away from coming out, but we can start to see recovery, I'd like to maybe use 5% in the next round. It helps you to figure out how to balance your budget. And that's another webinar. We're talking about pivoting to short-term budgets. Okay, so this is working out good. We're going to talk about the framework here in a minute. I just want to do a quick check-in. There's polling question number 4 on operating reserves. Isis, can you go ahead and drop that?
Absolutely. So you should be seeing an agree or disagree poll in front of you. And again, it'll take 30 seconds for folks to answer.
And I'd like to give a little bit of question, because this gets a little technical here with operating reserves and different, but the metering out concept, I hope everybody takes that. So Isis, ask me your question you asked a couple of minutes ago.
So how do you balance, your mission and values, and how do you view all of this through that lens?
Good. It's good this is the one time I can say this where it's not an in-person class, so you can't throw anything at me. And I have most of your videos turned off, so I can't tell if you're giving me dirty looks. But I'm going to say this right now. Okay. In normal times, demand related to your mission, demand generally for all nonprofit organizations always exceeds the ability you have or the resources you have to fill that. And so if you think about it, there's not enough money on the planet to solve poverty, to solve people going hunger. You know what I mean? So we're nonprofits by definition, we are constantly battling mission and getting as much out there as can, knowing that it never ends. Okay, so that's a given, right? Everybody agrees. Okay. Number 2, nonprofits, especially now, are always faced with the dilemma: do we help more right now and weaken the organization's ability to be around for the future? Okay, and there's a short-term return on that, and such. And my argument here is that it's always mission first, but sitting right next to mission is the one thing we need to do is help to make, I said this earlier, help to make sure that the organization can be around for a long time. If we help an organization get another 10 or 20 years of being in a financially healthy position, they are going to be able to leverage and serve a lot more people in the future, okay? Versus serving a few more people now. So here's the answer to the question, Isis. Imagine a nonprofit organization that has three main programs: Program A, Program B, Program C. Okay. And this always seems to fit out there. The programs that are most mission related, that are most needed, oftentimes lose the most money. It just seems to always be out there. You know what I mean? And that we have other programs we do that are sort of, I call it mission drift a little away from our mission, but they supply needed funds and they make money on those programs. You know what I mean? And so that would be Program C. Program B is a program that we're doing that is pretty close to mission, doesn't lose money, you know? So on one end, we have a program that makes money that's not that close to mission. And on the other end, we have a program that's like desperately needed and we lose our, you know what, on it. And that's the definition of a subsidized fee-for-service program. You know, people coming into a medical clinic to get a vaccination and we charge them $15, you know, meanwhile it costs us $100 to do it, you know, and we get donations and things around it. Okay, here's my answer, finally. Ready? During this time period, we are going to not stop doing mission or anything, but we're going to need to heavily favor the Program C's and back off on the Program A's for a while, because it means if we did more Program A, which is needed, we will cease to exist, or we will be in a weakened position, or we will down, you know what I'm saying? Because we're going to accelerate the programs we're losing the most. And so right now, we got to keep an eye on mission, but in the short term, we come off mission and we overprotect the financial position because that's where we're most at risk. That's a long answer. I'm going to try to get that into a blog. It's probably going to have to be an article, but I would say I can get that in 350 words or less.
Yeah, definitely send that to us whenever you do.
Okay. So with that, let's go back. We're now going to go to the framework. Before we pop open the framework, I just want to go through the pieces. The framework worksheet, and I love the word framework. We'll come back to that because framework is a thoughtful process on something that's hard to predict. That's what framework says to me. And we expect frameworks to move around. And when I use the word framework, it says we're not guessing, we're being thoughtful. The framework is divided into step 1, step 2, and step 3. And we're going to go through these 3 steps. Step 1 is the 3 pieces we talked about in section 2, assessing the health, vulnerability, funding sources, and demand. Step 2 is really just a red light, green light for organizations to understand they're either in this position or this position. It's in the middle of the page and it actually flashes, okay? And then step 3 is when we take everything we just talked about, it helps take the actions we're gonna take right now and get them in front of their face and the things that we're looking at right behind it. So I like the super short term and short term. Okay, so I'm going to pivot off of here. Give me 1 second. And this is good timing wise. We're good. Okay, does everybody see the framework? Isis, are we okay?
Yes, we see it, and I've plugged the link into the chat.
Okay,
good. Access it.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're looking at the framework now. Okay. Before I go through it, I do want to show a couple of things to you. Hold on a sec. So as we go through this framework, you'll notice step 1 is at the top, step 2 is a very narrow band in the middle, and step 3 is on the bottom. And I would encourage you to edit this to fit to you a little bit. And I'll show you where I've edited for groups, just a couple I've done in the last couple of days. I'm going to concentrate on the top. I love the word framework. I also oftentimes put a date up here, knowing that we will probably be updating this, and I'll talk about that towards the end, how often. We will be updating it probably. It's just how quick. We could literally update this thing, you know, every day. We don't do that, but I've been doing this once a month, and I'll talk about that. First column is the balance sheet assessment of health. So think about this for a minute. If you popped open your balance sheet, strong organizations are sitting on a lot of cash. They have very low accounts payable. And most importantly, they will have operating reserves or unrestricted net assets, okay? And they might only have a few weaknesses. Some of their assets might be tied up in a building, or if they have a lot of money and it's invested in the market is bouncing up and down, right? So they have some exposure to the market. A weak organization has nothing up here usually. Their cash is really tight. Accounts payable is growing. They have deferred income. They use next year's revenue for this year. And they have very low unrestricted net assets. So their operating reserves would be non-existent. Okay. So if you come down to this section here, everybody should erase this line. I don't use this too often. I like just the visual of these two numbers here. And what I said, formal, informal, even if you don't have an operating reserve policy and you're on the low side, just write 3 months in here. And then if you calculate your quick calculation, your operating reserves, your current assets minus current liabilities, that number divided by your budget, you know, from a monthly perspective. So if your goal was 3 months and you have negative 2 months, that slaps you in the face. If your goal is 6 months and you're sitting on 18 months, that's a different story. You see, in 2.5 seconds, you go weak or strong. Does everybody see that? So I like this. I had an organization the other day that had 30 months operating reserves and their goal was 12. And that lets the board know that, you know, they've got options. And I'll talk to you about what we did for that organization. It was an honor society for psychology. It was a really good group. And I'll talk to you about it. This one's my favorite bucket here. Remember the 3 buckets. Some people don't take offense at this word shaky. You can change the names and you might change the percentages. I like it because I like to sort of be in people's face about it, but it doesn't work for some groups. Okay. I do a lot of APA groups. They don't like the word shaky. It freaks them out. Okay. So I can visually here, don't go down to $5. I try to figure out buckets. I like the visual of like a grants could be in different places, but like all your memberships are here. Donations are running here, but you could break your donations down into certain events and things and such. Trick question. Could we have an increase in here? And the answer is actually yes. Shows you how early I built this thing. And I'm starting to add increases now. And the answer would be if you put in for under the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, and got that grant for 8 weeks to cover salaries and such, that's not a small number, right? That grant wasn't in your budget. So that's it's been approved. You got that, thank God. It's $200,000. That would be an increase. But notice these are percentages here. Okay, and then here the third bucket is the demand volatility. So you're listing all my in-person events. These have got canceled. We're worried about 2 grants. We had to downsize staff. We have a capacity building. Some of these grants are hard to do when we have remote workforce. Some of them, remote workforce doesn't affect you. You know what I mean? And then we have community-driven, or service-based demand. That if you're running a medical clinic or a food bank or a workforce development program, I do a lot with workforce development programs. The demand is skyrocketing. Anybody ever work with a workforce development program? I know you can't nod yes or no, but think of it this way. I have a group that does workforce development for seniors. They get paid by pushing more people in the workforce. Well, guess what? A lot of those workforce jobs don't work remotely. So they actually have less seniors in their program who can work right now. So think about it this way. They're grants based on the number of bodies that are being served, right? So if they had to pull for each 100 people they pull out of their program, they lose, I can't remember, like $150,000. You know what I mean? Now they're going to get them back in the workforce here soon as we come off sheltering in place. But you see what I mean? So the demand volatility is not just revenue. You're really looking at, they're struggling with when they're going to be able to get those 150 people back into the workforce. You know what I'm saying? And such. Here's the controllable, uncontrollable. They did not choose to pull people out of the workforce. That happened right now. The controllable is they're taking steps to be able to shift to seniors working remotely, which wasn't a focus for them before. Does that make sense? So that's where the controllable, uncontrollable. Sometimes this creates confusion for organizations. Sometimes it really helps the boards to feel like these are the things we don't control. These are the things we control. It's up to you. I have no problem blanking this section out or using it for something else or putting more of these up. Okay, let's go down the page.
Michael, I have a couple of points. One person asked if there's a completed sample of this on the website that we could get access to or that you could provide. And then just a second point, we're about at the 6-minute mark. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have one because everybody's situation is different. You would have to know everything behind them. I would offer this. I do the best I can with my time. If people call me and set up, I will be able to try to spend a half an hour or an hour with you to help you fight through this and look over yours. This is a small enough group. I made the mistake 3 weeks ago. There was like 200 people on it. I said that and I got like 30 requests. I got slammed. But if people want, I'm happy to do that with you. I learn from you too because I like every situation is different. I like to see your balance sheet where you're at, and we can go through. So I will be able to give you 2 30-minute sessions. The first one we do that analysis, and then we actually start to fill in and look at a short-term 90-day pivot budget. So just to be this and be available for some questions, just a few more minutes here. This is an easy box, but very difficult. You'll know that you're at either a weak or strong. Sometimes I get rid of the neutral box. It works for some groups. And you're just checking this. So you're reminding the board as we're making all these crazy decisions up here, and down here, that we're either in a weak or strong position. Okay, I just like this. And it's based on operating reserves. And then I usually have 7 or 8 things down here. It's just it worked on this template that these are our key actions we're taking, and some are in the super short term and some are in the short term, and it just helps people have a sense. And then I gently remind them that this is a framework and we have a date that's put in and we'll be revising this because everything around us is changing. I want to make 2 points. The thing we're in right now is in for a long time. Operating reserves only protect you against a short time. So we got to be very careful that we don't overbleed like we did in 9/11 and the banking crisis, 2008 and 9, that we really try to protect our operating reserves. I have seen articles, I got one sent to me, it was like hate mail, that, she was arguing, this person, that, universities should be spending down their endowments right now and to protect their sources and all that. And they might, but they can't long term. Yes, it'll protect, keep it in, but this thing's long enough that those funds are going to run out. Now those universities are going to be wrecked and they have no endowments, and so it's a really tough situation. Number 2, and I don't care if there's board members on this call or not, I'm just going to say this. All the decisions we're making are short term, correct? That's for staff, senior management those. But you can't hide from your board. We're not getting the boards to approve every little step we're taking, but through a framework like this, we can raise C&T, confidence and trust. They can see that we're going through a thoughtful process here, that we're making decisions best we can. We can get feedback from them, and hopefully we're getting we see where you're going, we're there for you. Keep going, this is strong. We have a comment or 2, but you're making the decisions as you go through, long-term decisions, that's where we get the board involved, but by all definitions, short-term, that's staff. It has a lot of implications. I really think a spreadsheet like this helps in the messaging to boards. So I know we only have less than 5 minutes left, but I'm here. I can hang on if that's okay. I know people hate when you go over, but it's a lot to talk about. And so any questions?
So we did have a question around how long does it typically take to go through the first draft of this assessment and framework in your experience?
I do multiples of these. Less is better than more. It's sort of like, what your gut feeling sometimes. I really rely on that. You should be able to do this framework in about 10 minutes. Because you want to go really quick to concentrate on the big things. Then obviously you're going to do some thinking, research, talk with staff, and you're going to go back and adjust it. But I'd love to take it from the blank sheet of paper and go through real quick. Whether your organization's in a strong or weak position. You list your strengths or your weaknesses really fast down here. Which funding sources are really vulnerable. It's really we got to concentrate on these. Okay. And then, which events just got rocketed or programs, and you should be able to fill this out off the top of your head, and then you go back and you start to do this. To me, it's like that I'll go back to that Georgetown class, the Easter salesperson, she was just literally hyperventilating over in the class. And it's like, okay, let's just start sketching this out. And then you start to refine it.
And then we did have a question around the communication side of this. I know we obviously don't have time to cover the communications piece during this session. Is there another session that you have available to go over the communication side of it?
There's a lot of things that ping off of this, and 3 things. One, read the article on using operating reserves, number 1. Number 2, pivoting to short-term 90-day rolling budgets. That's on another webinar. That annual budgets don't matter anymore, for a while. In fiscal years, ends don't matter. I mean, you could have had your year end is June 30th. You're having a great year to February, and now you're tanking, So all that doesn't matter. It's rolling short-term budgets. The third thing I want to state is transparency is critical right now. In this framework, I don't hesitate to share it with board members and with outsiders. I want people to know that we're taking as thoughtful process as we can while we're sometimes outright guessing on some things. So I really think, because we're not asking the boards to approve everything, I think you need to over communicate right now. I just posted an article earlier this week, and Georgetown picked it up, on setting up COVID-19 task forces. I think organizations can really benefit from pulling together a small group of board members, or even community people, health service workers, remote work people and such, to help do some of this planning and work on the framework together, So I got 10 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, do you mind, Mike, do you go back to the slide real quick?
Oh yeah, I do want to go back to, and selfishly, I have one thing I do want to point out. Okay, and then I do want to end on this slide here, the last slide, and then we'll pop up yours. That the assessment gives the board of directors, this is what this is all about, confidence that senior management is taking a thoughtful approach and to qualify near-term decision-making, and this conservative bias of protecting financial position. I just think it's a given. It means we are pulling off mission a little bit, but that's so we can be around longer, so we get back to doing it again in survival. Okay, there you are.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I mean, just looking at the comments today, I think this is a really sobering topic, but very important. So I think we all really appreciate you being generous with your time and knowledge today. So folks, if you look in the chat, I did plug in a quick SurveyMonkey link. If you don't mind just filling that out, your feedback is really important for us, especially right now. As you know, as Mike has mentioned, things are changing almost every minute. It's good for us to know what you're going through and what type of content you want to see. So if you don't mind filling that out. My information is on the left. I did mention on the chat that I'll be sending out a recording of this webinar, as well as a PDF version of the presentation and some of the tools and resources that were mentioned, and then as well as Mike's information. I did include some of the upcoming events that we have coming up. Obviously, I won't go into all of them right now, but these are some of our, COVID specific resources. And if you're interested and want to register, definitely go on to our website. And I will be sending out the link to the SurveyMonkey in the follow-up email as well, if you missed it in the chat. But with that being said, thanks again, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're gonna let you off so you can enjoy the rest of your day.
Right, and just a quick reminder, the website, that framework is sitting in the resource page on the SC4N. The FS4N is just the consulting side. So go there, and we're literally posting things every week. A couple of things were posted up this week. Good, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody.